Good morning, Dr. Verma. How are you today?
Great, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for asking. Could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Anjuli Verma. I'm a professor of politics at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and I just voted today.
Thank you for voting. I appreciate that. So just before we start, my name is Ayah Elwannas. I currently live in Dubai. I'm the director of social media for Girls for Politics. Um,
Great.
and we are so glad to interview you today, and we thank you for your time. My first question for you is, why are you interested in politics and why did you choose to study it?
Well, to me, the study of politics is really the study of power and who has it, how you get it, how it works, and to what ends. And the truth is, I actually didn't think I would become sort of a politics professor. I actually have my PhD in criminology, law, and society. And what I quickly realized during my graduate training is that when it comes to the political question of justice, a lot of times in our country, we get caught up in the question of crime, how to prevent it, what causes it, how to fight it. But the truth is, and this is the political aspect of what I do, is the real question is why we punish the way we punish, and why we punish who we punish. Ultimately, I think my life's work is to pose the question of whether in the United States it's possible for us to conceive of justice without punishment.
Um, how would you say your education, a bachelor's in political and social thought from the University of Virginia and getting a PhD from UC Irvine prepared you for your astonishing career?
Well, I think what I got in graduate school when I got my PhD in criminology, law, and society at UC Irvine was a whole set of methodological tools to empirically answer important questions about our social and political world. However, um, gathering data, analyzing data, building statistical models, all of those things are mere kind of techniques without some underlying philosophy and purpose and ethic to what kind of questions are worth posing and for whom and on behalf of whom. And I would say that my bachelor degree from University of Virginia in political and social thought gave me the philosophical tools to really think critically and rigorously about the underlying logic of knowledge, and about the fact that knowledge is always a production of power. And so one of the things that is really important to me in my teaching now at both the undergraduate and graduate level is to help my students understand that they're going to be in the position of wielding some amount of expertise. And expertise is a very dangerous position of power because as soon as someone tells us what the truth is, they have the power to really control our reality. And so my teaching mission is really to help people be skeptical, to have the ability to understand that knowledge is power, really.
Could you speak a little bit about your chancellor's postdoctoral fellow at the University of California, Berkeley School of Law in the Jurisprudence and Social Policy program? How was that program like and what did you learn?
Yeah, well, I would say, one of the capstones of my career so far was having the privilege to spend 2 years at UC Berkeley in the law school, kind of loafing around with with very few responsibilities, but for to meet with world-class scholars, to interact with some of the smartest, most committed students, again, at both the undergraduate and graduate level and in the law school, and really be exposed to deeper and different literatures and framings of the issues that I study, which are punishment in society. And I would say that that was a time in my career where I probably had the most creative sort of growth. And part of that is that I could take a breath, you know. I wasn't under the gun to finish a dissertation or to publish an article. And what I really learned from that is that writing for its own sake is really about crafting your ideas and clarifying your thinking as much as it is as about producing some like finished, polished, published product. And now that I'm a professor and I'm, you know, sort of publishing a lot, I often have to remember that writing is a craft for thinking, and it's its own product, and not everything, you know, that you write has to be for other people. It can be just for you. And so that's how some of the best thinking I've been able to do has happened. And UC Berkeley was really a place that allowed me to incubate, if that makes sense.
Definitely. Describe your most favorite class that you've either taken or taught.
Oh, wow. Well, I'll start with my most favorite class that I teach. And that's a class here at UC Santa Cruz called The Power to Punish. And part of what has made it my most favorite class are the students that I've had the privilege to teach. This is an upper division elective course, so it tends to be juniors and seniors who are majoring either in politics or legal studies or philosophy. And you know, what I love about that class is that I think students come into it thinking that it's going to be a class about the politics of crime and punishment in America. And they think that we're going to be talking about things that are ultimately pretty familiar to all of us by now. Mass incarceration, the fact that we have more than 2 million people behind bars in the United States, the fact that, you know, the United States has a quarter of the world's population, but the vast majority of prisoners, that mass incarceration is the new Jim Crow, right? Like all of these things, college students by the 21st century, I think are already fairly well educated on. But what they get in that class is actually a deconstruction of what it means for the state to wield the legitimate power to punish. And we talk about what it is that legitimates the state's monopoly on violence. And we talk about how violence is not something that criminals do. Violence is power, and the state also uses violence to govern. And so by the end of the course, we kind of flip the causal direction of first comes crime, then comes punishment on its head. And we start to think about things like, is the state's form of punishing under mass incarceration itself a crime, right? So we start to open our minds to the possibility that crime begins with the state rather than ends with the state. Now, my most favorite class that I've ever taken is probably a graduate seminar at UC Irvine when I was getting my PhD. And I was taking it from a professor who would eventually become my dissertation chair, my lifelong mentor. Her name is Professor Mona Lynch. And the way that she structured this course was that, you know, all of us graduate students came to it with a project that we were working on. And it was focused on analyzing organizational texts as artifacts of the social and the political. And that was the first time that I guess I built the confidence to know that I could analyze data. And ultimately what came out of that seminar would be my very first peer-reviewed publication. And so I really enjoyed the sort of workshop feel, and how Professor Lynch really broke down the typical hierarchy of professor who's teaching student, but it was kind of like we were all rolling up our sleeves and solving problems and puzzles together. And to me, that feel of collaborating on solving important puzzles is the very best of what any kind of university education can provide.
Well, both sound like classes I would definitely enroll myself in.
Totally. I'd
Um,
love to have you in my class.
I hope I have the opportunity. In your experience, how is teaching politics different from learning it?
That's such a great question. Such a great question. Well, I'm going to be honest with you. Teaching politics is a bit more, it's safer, if that makes sense. Because what's always happening anytime you take a class is, there's a course syllabus, and someone like me, the professor, has already curated and filtered the things that they feel comfortable and that they think are important to bring to bear for whatever the political topic is. And there are always moments in the classroom where I think that I've mastered something. I think that I understand Foucault. I think that I have learned everything that could possibly be learned about mass incarceration in America. And I'll have a student call me out. They'll call me out on something that I've done to make our classroom have a hierarchical power imbalance. It could be something like interrupting someone when they speak. It could be something like failing to recognize someone who's been trying to get in on the discussion. It could be my failure to use the correct gender pronoun for the student. And those are the moments where politics is seeping into my politics courses. And it's easier to teach it, but you're never safe, as it were, if you're really doing it right. And ultimately, I think my students will tell you that in my classroom, even though there are uncomfortable moments, that I really think of my job as empowering my students to call out power imbalances where they see them, with each other, but also with me. And so the learning and the teaching of politics, as it turns out, are completely intertwined for me.
Have you enjoyed your time being a political science professor at University of California, Santa Cruz? What do you think has been unique about this role?
Yeah, so, I've had, I'm a little bit untraditional, I guess, in terms of my career path, because I didn't just kind of go to college and then go to grad school and then get a job as a professor. I had a whole career before I decided to go back to graduate school to get my PhD. And, on the one hand, there were times when I just like, wow, like I'm so old and I'm like back in school, but I'll say that, having the experience of having a career prior to my career in academia has really allowed me to see that this is the perfect job for me. Being a university professor and a full-time social scientific researcher is the privilege of a lifetime, really. I honestly can't believe that I get paid to do what I do, and to do it where I do it, and with the people, my colleagues here. I mean, I live in Santa Cruz, California. I mean, it's paradise, right? But moreover, the university here, UC Santa Cruz, has a very particular kind of culture where you have the freedom to experiment. You have the freedom to grow, even as a professor, into something that might be like, you can take like risky directions, right, with your research. And there's really a culture here of, it's okay to try something that, you know, is novel and fail, and that has value in its own right. So I really appreciate being here, especially at this point in my career. And I guess I'll say that, you know, on the day-to-day basis, the sort of life or routine of being a university professor has changed, right? Under the pandemic. I mean, I really miss being with people. I really miss being in the classroom. I think that learning to teach remotely and learn remotely is something that, you know, no one prepared me to do. But, you know, I've been really surprised and really heartened by the kinds of learning and teaching and connection that it turns out is possible. I mean, look at us, like we're meeting across oceans and vast distances, and we would have probably never connected, but for the fact that, you know, here I am just sitting here, you know, on Zoom, and you know, we have more time in a sense to make these kinds of connections. But yeah, a professor's day is often very well balanced. It's like you do some writing and some reading and some thinking, and then you engage with students and colleagues, and then you go to some meetings, and you know, it's just, it's a very humane profession, where it's one of the last jobs where I think you can maintain some modicum of dignity and remain unalienated from the product of your labor, to get Marxian on it. And I think we need to fashion more careers and more work environments that really respect human dignity, now more than ever.
We've seen that you worked at the American Civil Liberties Union. Could you expand on what you did during your time there?
Yeah, so that was that like first career that I referenced earlier. I had a wonderful job at the ACLU, which is a fantastic organization, filled with some of the brightest, most compassionate, smartest people I've really ever met. I started as a media relations assistant, where I would basically pitch stories to newspapers and televisions. I would conduct media trainings for our clients, which was a really, really fun part of my job. I mean, a lot of our clients obviously, you know, were involved in litigation against the government for some of the most egregious abuses of power. And the opportunity to really help our clients tell their story in their own words, right? Just to empower them to take back the narrative was essentially what that communications and media work was. After you know, that media kind of more specific role, I transitioned into what we would call strategic communications. And that's kind of taking a step back and looking at sort of what is the public opinion around civil liberties and civil rights issues. My kind of focus area was on drug policy reform and racial justice within the criminal law system. And so, you know, we would do focus groups, we would do work with public opinion polling firms to really try to understand what are the deep core values that Americans hold around some of these issues that may not be immediately apparent on the surface. And what's kind of the meta narrative, right, about what our justice system is for, and, you know, who the victims are. And I learned so much about people. I mean, you know, people from all walks of life. And I'll tell you that, you know, one of the more humbling aspects of that job was, you know, I think that there's a problematic tendency, especially on the left, to just kind of dismiss the intelligence or the humanity of people that don't agree with you. And I think when you feel really strongly about policy issues, as I do, I mean, you know, I grew up in Auburn, Alabama. I have, you know, lots of family members who voted for Donald Trump in 2016. And I will go ahead and reveal that I do not support Donald Trump. And I didn't in 2016, and I certainly don't in 2020. And I feel really strongly about that. But what I learned from my strategic communications work at the ACLU is that people have their reasons. You know, people have their reasons for feeling the way that they do about these issues. And, you know, getting in a screaming match, you know, isn't going to change hearts and minds. And I think what changes hearts and minds is being exposed to people's stories, surprising stories, right? And I think that that's honestly how you chip away at white supremacy and racism. I mean, I grew up in, you know, a place that you know, still has like overt white supremacist values. I mean, you know, but I saw a lot of people be human to each other because they knew each other well enough, or they had been exposed to someone's story in sort of the gritty reality of life, where we can't just essentialize people, you know, based on what they look like. And you would be surprised about, you know, how many Alabama rednecks are in fact not racists, you know, and it's important to remember that, especially as we go into the 2020 election and whatever comes after it, right? So.
Do you have any advice for young women or adults wanting to study politics in college and possibly go into academia?
Yeah, so I would say to all of the women out there, young, old, or somewhere in between. I just turned 40 this year, so I guess I'm old. I'm not sure. Maybe 40 is the new 30. Let's just go with that. I would say that, gosh, you know, our political system needs you. Our political system needs you, and it needs you for just who you are. You don't have to, you know, mimic anyone else. Like, you are who you are. And it's not because you're a woman. It's because of everything that you've experienced in your life has made you the person that you are. Everything that you've survived, everything that you've been through, all the mistakes you've made, all the people that stand behind you and support you, all of that has made you a person that has something to say and has something to contribute. And don't ever let anyone tell you that you don't have a place, or you need to act differently, or that you're being too uppity. A lot of times I think that, you know, when women enter any space of power, whether that's being a professor and walking into a classroom, or doing a media interview, or running for president, I mean, anything, any space of power, I think women are expected to make other people feel comfortable. And I think time's up. It's not your job to make other people comfortable. It's your job to make yourself comfortable. And I think if you do that, you're making the world a better place, one comfortable woman at a time.
I completely agree with you. Could you speak shortly about any publications you've done? How did you do this research, and which has been your favorite publication and why?
Well, I think my favorite publication is one that hasn't happened yet, which is going to be my first book. I'm working on that right now. Anyone who's ever written a book probably will never forget the experience of doing their first one. So I'm kind of in the thick of it, and you know, I think writing a book really gives you, it calls your bluff in a sense. It's like, are these ideas really worth the ink you're spilling on these pages and the years of life that are draining out of you, you know, as you're writing it? And I'd like to say that I'm at a point with my book project where it's been really affirming to to be able to stand behind the importance of the contribution. So the working title of this book, like look out for it sometime in 2020, is, again, working title is Downshift: California's Great Experiment in the Future of Decarceration in America. And that book project grows out of a number of publications where I studied California's 2011 public safety realignment legislation, which was a massive criminal justice reform. The legislation known as realignment has been called the greatest experiment in incarceration policy in America, and essentially enabled California to downsize its prison system in an unprecedented way. I mean, you know, before 2011, California's prisons were at 200% capacity, holding twice as many people as they were, you know, designed to hold. Our state was the largest, you know, had the largest number of incarcerated people, not only in the United States, but had the largest prison system in the Western world. I mean, you know, California was a behemoth incarcerator up until, you know, the first decade of the 21st century. And so all of my research has been essentially looking at the power, but also, you know, the prospects and the promises of law to instigate something like this massive prison downsizing to end mass incarceration, but also the perils of legal reform without other kinds of reforms that are feeding into a more complex ecosystem of politics. And so, you know, California is one of the best laboratories for studying that political ecosystem, because we have federal court intervention finding that our prisons were so egregiously overcrowded that they violated the Eighth Amendment prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. Then we had the legislature pass Assembly Bill 109 in 2011, public safety realignment. Then we had the voters, you know, put an initiative on our ballot in 2014 called Proposition 47 that decriminalized a lot of low-level, nonviolent drug offenses and other kinds of crimes. And you have all these kind of things swirling around. And what you see is a state that honestly has been able to turn the corner. And usually the stuff that we as political and social scientists are studying is why it's so hard to change organizations and institutions. Like why and how did they resist transformative change and just, you know, remain so yoked to the status quo? Well, I think California's criminal justice system gives us a bit more hope and an empirical case of a huge, massive, sprawling set of organizations and institutions that are changing before our very eyes. And so the stuff that I've published so far, you know, is based on really kind of analyzing the practitioners that do the punishing of like day-to-day mass incarceration. So I do police ride-alongs, you know, with police. I talk to sheriffs who run jails and, you know, kind of hang out with them behind the scenes to see like what their mentalities are. I observe like, you know, county level superior criminal court to see kind of like how the judges and the prosecutors and the defendants and the defense attorneys are actually, you know, all kind of working together to produce this like assembly line of processing people, you know, in and out of carceral spaces. And so, you know, you can find my work in peer-reviewed journals such as Law and Society Review, also the annals of the American Annals of Political and Social Science, the journal Punishment and Society, and hopefully look out for my book in 2021.
Well, congratulations. I definitely look forward to reading it.
It's not done yet, so
when it's
can't pop the champagne too early.
Well, that's it for questions. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy workday to speak with Girls for Politics. Your work definitely is an inspiration to our organization, and this interview will definitely benefit our followers and members. Dr. Verma, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. You're my inspiration. So go Girls for Politics. And don't forget to vote.
Thank you.
All right.